Anna Miller's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the rope. She didn't look at the crowd. She couldn't. If she saw one face, she recognized one neighbor who had watched her husband get buried. One merchant who had taken her last payment. She would fall apart right there in the dirt, and her children needed her standing. So she stared straight ahead, jaw locked, and led Daisy forward into the auction square like she was walking to her own execution. Because she was. If this story moves something in you, please subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell and leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The town of Grover's Hollow didn't stop for grief. It never had. Not when the drought came and cracked the earth open like a wound. Not when the bankmen rode through and took half the farms before the ink dried on the notices. Not when Henry Miller died in the middle of February, with nothing left in his name but a half-rotted barn and 3 children who didn't yet understand what the word gone really meant. Grover's Hollow kept moving, and Anna Miller had no choice but to move with it. She was 26 years old and felt every year of it in her bones. People said she was still young. People said things like that when they didn't have to live inside your life. When Henry was alive, she had been a woman who laughed easily, who planted a kitchen garden with her daughters every spring and sang while she did it. Now she counted dried beans in the dark before the children woke because she didn't want them to see her count. Daisy was the last thing. The cow was 9 years old, slow-moving, and gave less milk than she used to. But for 2 years, that milk had been the difference between the Miller children eating and not eating. Anna had stretched every drop. She had sold what she could at the market in town, a quart here, half a quart there, and used the coins to buy flour, cornmeal, salt pork when she could afford it. Daisy wasn't profitable. Daisy wasn't practical. But Daisy had been the thread holding the whole fraying thing together, until the feed ran out. Until the hay rotted from a wet autumn followed by a killing winter. Until Anna sat down one February night and worked the numbers 3 times hoping she had made an error and found she hadn't. She could not feed Daisy anymore. And a cow she couldn't feed was a cow that would die anyway, only slower, and with more suffering, and with nothing to show for it. So she made the decision that broke something in her she didn't have a name for yet. She would auction Daisy in town on Saturday. She told herself it was practical. She told herself the money from the sale would cover the children's needs through spring planting and that by summer she could find work enough to start over. She told herself Henry would have understood. She told herself a lot of things that week standing over the stove or staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, and none of them made her feel any better. On the morning of the auction, her eldest daughter Clara, who was 9 years old and already too serious for her age, stood in the doorway of the barn, watching Anna brush Daisy one last time. "You don't have to make her pretty, Mama," Clara said quietly. "She's just going to somebody else's farm." "I know that," Anna said. She didn't stop brushing. "Are you crying?" "No." Clara was quiet a moment. "Your shoulders are doing that thing they do when you're crying, but you don't want us to see." Anna set the brush down. She pressed her forehead briefly against Daisy's warm flank and said nothing for a long moment. Then she straightened, turned around and looked at her daughter with a face that was steady and dry and utterly determined. "Go get your brother and sister," she said. "You're all staying with Mrs. Pruitt today. I'll be back before supper. Can we come with you?" "No." "But Mama, Clara?" Her voice was soft, but it was a wall. "Please." The girl went. Anna put on her second-best dress. Her best was saved for church and funerals, and she refused to wear funeral clothes today. And she braided her hair and pinned it back, and she stood in front of the small piece of mirror hung on the kitchen wall, and looked at herself for a long moment. There were lines she didn't remember. There was a hollowness around her eyes she didn't recognize, but her chin was up, and that was what mattered. She walked Daisy the 2 miles into town with a rope in her hand and her head high, and she did not let herself think about anything except putting one foot in front of the other. Grover's Hollow on a Saturday auction day was as close to lively as the town ever got. Ranchers came in from the outlying properties. Farmers came from the surrounding land. Merchants who usually stayed behind their counters stood out on the boardwalk. The auctioneer, a barrel-shaped man named Dobbs, who smelled of tobacco and wore a hat 2 sizes too large, was already calling numbers on a pair of draft horses when Anna arrived. She registered Daisy with the assistant and found a place to wait at the edge of the square. That was when the watching began. She felt it immediately. The way conversations slowed when she passed. The way eyes moved to her and then away quickly. The way people look at something uncomfortable, an injury, a scene, something they don't know how to address. Anna had been in Grover's Hollow for 6 years. She had been Henry's wife, quiet and steady and respected enough. But a widow with 3 children and no land was a different category of person, and she was learning that in ways she hadn't anticipated. She heard it too. Not loudly. Never loudly. Grover's Hollow was too small for anything to be said loudly. It was Mrs. Holt, the banker's wife, speaking in a low voice to her friend Mrs. Carver. Poor thing. You know she's been barely holding on since Henry passed. I don't know how she's managed this long. And Mrs. Carver. 3 children, no land. She ought to think about what comes next, is what I think. What comes next? Well, some man will have to take her in eventually. It's only practical. Anna stared forward and kept her face neutral and felt something harden in her chest, like iron cooling in a mold. She was not going to be taken in. She was not practical circumstances in someone else's life. She was a woman who had built a home out of almost nothing for 2 years, and she was here today with her head up and her shoulders back, and she did not need anyone's pity or their advice about what came next. The hardening helped. She held onto it like a handhold. When Dobbs called Daisy's number, Anna walked forward and stood to the side of the small roped area, holding the lead rope, while the auctioneer began his call. Fine milk cow, 9 years old, gentle temperament. Dried up more like, someone said from the crowd. There was a ripple of low laughter. Anna did not look in the direction of the voice. Opening bid at $4, Dobbs called. Silence. Anna kept her chin up. $4 for a cow, Dobbs said again with the particular rhythm of a man who was being patient. Fine animal steady on her feet. I'll bid $2, said a man in the back. Tom Reese. Anna knew him by the voice. He ran a hog operation east of town and had a reputation for buying things cheap and working them hard. He was smiling when he said it, the kind of smile that knew it was the only offer coming. $2, Dobbs repeated. Do I hear 3? No one spoke. Anna's throat tightened. She had counted on at least 6. $6 would carry them through to April planting if she was careful. $2 would carry them 3 weeks, maybe 4, and then what? 3, she said. Every head turned. Dobbs blinked. Ma'am, the seller can't. I know what the rules are, Anna said, and her voice was remarkably steady. She would think about that later with something close to pride. I'm asking if anyone else will bid 3. I'm asking if this animal is worth $3 to anyone in this town. The square was very quiet. Tom Reese's smile had gone flat. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read except that it wasn't kind. $2.50, he said. That's my final. Someone coughed. Someone else shifted their weight. No one bid 3. Anna felt the air go out of her in a long, slow exhale that she kept completely silent. She was staring at the dirt in front of her feet and thinking about Clara's face in the barn doorway that morning. Your shoulders are doing that thing when she heard it. A voice from the outer edge of the crowd, quiet, unhurried, utterly certain. $10. The square erupted, not in cheering, in pure bewildered noise. Men turning. Women turning. Dobbs nearly dropping his gavel. $10 for a 9-year-old milk cow with reduced yield was not a bid. It was a statement. It was the kind of number that made people think someone had lost their mind or found something everyone else had missed. Anna turned. She saw him for the first time. He was standing at the back of the crowd, which was parting around him now, the way water parts around a stone people, stepping aside without quite realizing they were doing it. He was lean and weathered, somewhere in his mid-30s, with the look of a man who spent most of his life outdoors and had made a kind of peace with that. His hat was pulled low enough that she couldn't read his eyes yet, but his posture was entirely calm. One thumb hooked in his belt. Not performing the bid, just making it. $10. Dobbs repeated in the voice of a man who wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. I have $10. Do I hear 11? Tom Reese stared at the stranger. Something moved through his expression. Then he looked away and shook his head once. Sold, Dobbs said. $10 to Sir your name for the record. Ethan Carter, the man said. The crowd murmured. No one knew him. Anna's heart was doing something irregular. $10 was more than she'd hoped for. $10 was a miracle practically. She should have been flooded with relief, and part of her was genuinely. Her hands had stopped shaking, she noticed, but she was also watching this Ethan Carter move through the crowd toward the auctioneer's table, and there was something in the way he moved that made her stand very still. She handed Daisy's lead rope to the assistant and went to collect her payment, and she was folding the bills with hands that were finally steady when she heard footsteps stop behind her. She turned. He was closer than she'd expected. Not threateningly so, he'd left a respectful distance, but close enough that she could see his face properly now. Dark eyes with something quiet in them. A jaw that needed a shave. A scar along his left cheekbone, thin and old. He held his hat in his hands now, which she noticed because it was the gesture men in Grover's Hollow made at funerals and in church, and neither of those was what this was. Mrs. Miller, he said. She blinked. You know my name. I asked, he said simply. I came into town yesterday, heard about the auction. Her chin went up half an inch. She didn't know why. Some old reflex. Then you know I've been paid fairly. Generously even. I appreciate it. He nodded once. Then he said, I've got Daisy over with the handler. I'd like you to take her back. Anna stared at him. I'd like you to take the cow back. He repeated the same even tone like he was stating something obvious. And keep the money. The noise of the square seemed to recede. She was aware dimly that people nearby had stopped their own conversations. That the radius of quiet around them was expanding. Sir, she said carefully, I don't understand what you're doing. I expect that's fair, he said. I'm not sure I can explain it well, but that animal's been feeding your children. I don't see a reason to end that. That's... She stopped, started again. That's $10 you've spent for nothing. Not for nothing. Something in his tone made her very still again. Mr. Carter, she said. Her voice was low and it had an edge. I don't know what you've been told about my situation, but I am not in the business of accepting charity from strangers, and I am certainly not. I'm not offering charity, he said. Then what are you offering? He looked at her for a moment. Not the way Tom Reese had looked at her. Not the way the banker's wife had looked at her. He looked at her the way a person looks at another person, direct and clear, with no calculation behind it that she could identify. Permission to call on you, he said. That's all I'm asking for. Take your cow home, keep the money, and let me come by your farm on Sunday afternoon and introduce myself properly. If after that you'd rather I never come back, I'll honor that without argument. The square was silent enough that she could hear someone's horse stamp its foot 2 lots over. Anna Miller looked at this man she had known for approximately 4 minutes. She looked at his hat in his hands and the steadiness in his face and the complete, somewhat unnerving absence of apology in his voice. He wasn't pleading, he wasn't performing. He was asking, and there was a difference, and she knew the difference because she hadn't felt it in a long time. Something moved in her chest. She didn't examine it. She didn't have the room for it standing in the middle of Grover's Hollow with half the town watching. You're not from here, she said. No, ma'am. Where from? Wyoming originally. Been working cattle in Kansas the last 3 years. Got a position as foreman on the Hallett Ranch east of here. I start Monday. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she looked down at the folded bills in her hand. Then she looked back up. Sunday, she said. 2 o'clock. If you're late, I won't answer the door. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, more like the absence of tension that had been there before. I won't be late, he said. He turned to go collect his hat, which he was already holding. She realized which meant that small motion was something else, and she turned back toward the assistant to reclaim Daisy's lead rope, and the crowd around them slowly audibly resumed its noise, and Anna Miller walked out of the square with her cow and $10, and a feeling she was completely unprepared to deal with. She walked the 2 miles home with Daisy plodding beside her, and the late winter sun cutting low across the flat Nebraska land, and she let herself feel exactly none of it until she was past the bend in the road where the elm tree stood and the farmhouse came into view. And then she stopped walking. She stood in the road. Her hand tightened on the lead rope. She thought about Clara, who was at Mrs. Pruitt's right now, probably reading to her younger sister Ida, the way she always did, patient beyond her years. She thought about her son James, who was 6 years old and had started watching the road in the evenings the way he used to watch it for his father. She thought about standing in front of that square of mirror this morning with her chin up. She thought about a man who said, "I won't be late," like it was a vow. "What in the world am I doing?" she said aloud to no one, to the empty Nebraska road to Daisy, who turned her large placid head and regarded her without opinion. Anna exhaled. Then she walked home and started the fire, and started the soup, and said nothing whatsoever to Clara about any of it when she picked the children up from Mrs. Pruitt's house, and she lay awake that night for a long time, in the dark of the bedroom she had shared with Henry, with the $10 folded on the nightstand beside her, and told herself very firmly that Sunday was just Sunday, and a man calling was just a man calling, and she was not a woman who made decisions with her heart when her children's lives depended on her head. She told herself this until nearly midnight. She was not entirely sure she believed it. 2 miles east in the bunkhouse of the Hallett Ranch, Ethan Carter sat on the edge of a cot and turned his hat in his hands in the dark, the same slow turning he'd been doing since he got back, and thought about the look on a woman's face when someone chose to see her instead of her circumstances. He'd spent a long time looking for something he couldn't name. He thought maybe he'd just found a direction. Sunday came, the way difficult things always come faster than you're ready for and slower than you can stand. Anna had told herself she wouldn't prepare anything special. She had told herself this was a simple meeting, a courtesy, a woman being polite to a man who had done her an unusual kindness, and that nothing about it required effort beyond what she'd give any visitor. Then she found herself at 6 in the morning, scrubbing the kitchen floor on her hands and knees, and she sat back on her heels and had a very honest conversation with herself about what exactly she was doing and why. She stood up and made coffee instead. Clara watched all of this from the doorway with the particular expression of a 9-year-old who understood considerably more than anyone had told her. "Who's coming, Mama?" "A man I met in town." "What kind of man?" "The kind that minds his business," Anna said pleasantly. Which was the kind of answer that didn't answer anything, and Clara knew it, and they both knew that Clara knew it, and still the girl let it go because she was 9 and wise enough to choose her battles. James was less diplomatic. He was 6 and had recently decided that the man of the household was his primary occupation, a decision Anna found simultaneously heartbreaking and inconvenient. When she told him there would be a visitor for Sunday afternoon, he crossed his arms over his small chest and said, "What does he want?" "To introduce himself." "Why?" "Because he's being polite." "Papa never had to introduce himself," James said with the absolute iron logic of a child who doesn't yet understand that that sentence contains 4 different kinds of pain. Anna crouched down in front of him. She put both hands on his shoulders and looked him in the face, and chose her words the way she always did with James, carefully, directly, without softening that he'd see through anyway. "Your papa was wonderful," she said. "This is just a man coming to have coffee. That's all it is today." "All right." James held her gaze for a long moment. Then he uncrossed his arms. "All right," he said in the tone of someone granting a significant concession. Ethan Carter arrived at 1:58. Anna noted the time because she'd been watching the road from the kitchen window in a way she refused to classify as watching the road from the kitchen window. He came on horseback, a dark bay horse, and he rode the way men ride when riding is simply a means of getting somewhere rather than something they're performing. He tied the horse at the post and came to the door and knocked, not the knock of someone uncertain, not the knock of someone trying to impress, just a plain, even knock, and Anna dried her hands on her apron and opened the door. "Mrs. Miller," he said, hat in hand. "Same as in the square." "Mr. Carter." She stepped back. "Come in." He came in and took in the kitchen in one quiet sweep of his eyes, and then didn't look at it again, which she noticed and filed away without yet knowing what to do with. Some men looked at the state of a room and catalogued it. He looked at her children. They were arranged with unsubtle strategy. Clara and Ida, who was 7, and had her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn mouth, seated at the kitchen table, and James standing beside the table with his arms at his sides and his chin elevated at roughly the same angle as his mother's. Ethan looked at all 3 of them. Then he crouched down to James's level. "You must be the man of the house," he said. James studied him. "I am. I figured. You've got that look." He said it without a trace of condescension. He said it the way you say something you actually mean. "Name's Ethan Carter. I work at the Hallett Ranch." "I know who you are," James said. "Mama told us." "That's fair." Ethan glanced at the girls. "And you two?" Clara answered for both of them because Clara answered for most things. "I'm Clara. This is Ida." A beat. "You bought our cow." "I did." "And then gave her back." "I did that too." Clara tilted her head. "Why?" It was the question Anna had been waiting to hear him answer because she'd been asking it herself for 3 days and hadn't gotten anywhere satisfying. She leaned against the counter and watched him, and he looked up at her briefly, before looking back at Clara, and something passed between the adults in that look that the children didn't catch. "Because your mother needed Daisy more than I did," he said, "and because I could afford $10 and she was working too hard to ask for help." "She never asks for help," Ida offered with the cheerful candor of a 7-year-old. "Ida," Anna said. "It's true, Mama." Ethan almost smiled. Anna could see it the way the corner of his mouth moved and then held still, and something about the restraint of it was more arresting than if he'd smiled outright. He stood up. He looked at Anna. "I appreciate the invitation." "Sit down," she said. "I'll get the coffee." What happened over the next hour was not what she had expected, and also, she suspected afterward, was exactly what he had intended, which was very little at all. He didn't talk about himself excessively. He didn't fill silences with performance. He answered what was asked of him, and asked things in return that were genuine rather than polite. And when Ida decided halfway through the coffee that she wanted to show him the picture she'd drawn of Daisy, he looked at it with the full attention of someone looking at something that mattered. "She's got her ears right," he said seriously. "That's harder to get right than most people think." Ida beamed. Clara watched him the way she watched everything, with the measuring eyes of a child who had spent 2 years learning to assess threats. James said almost nothing, which was its own kind of thing, because James said something about everything. When Ethan left just before 4, he shook James's hand at the door, shook it the way you shake a man's hand with full seriousness, and James let him, and afterward stood in the doorway, watching him ride off down the road, with an expression Anna couldn't read. "Well?" she asked. James considered. "He looked at your picture, Mama." She frowned. "What picture?" "The one on the mantel, of you and Papa." "He looked at it when you were getting the coffee." "He looked at it for a long time, and then he looked away, and he didn't say anything about it." He turned from the door. "I think that means something." Anna stood in the doorway long after he'd gone inside, and looked at the empty road, and thought about a man who looked at a dead husband's photograph and said nothing. She didn't know what to do with that either. He came back the following Sunday, and the Sunday after that. The routine of it built itself without being declared. He came at 2 left by 4, sat at her kitchen table, and drank her coffee, and talked to her children with the same consistent, unforced attention he'd offered from the first visit. He asked Clara about the books she was reading. He listened to Ida's increasingly elaborate stories about Daisy's personality with an expression of apparent genuine interest. He found moments alone with James not manufactured just natural gaps in the afternoon, where they talked about the ranch work, the horses, the kind of practical things men discuss when they're trying to find common ground. Anna watched all of it from the edges. She was still watching. She couldn't stop. The third Sunday after he'd gone, Clara came to find her in the kitchen where she was standing with a dish towel she'd forgotten to use. "Mama, do you like him?" Anna set the dish towel down. "He's a good man." "That's not what I asked." She looked at her daughter, 9 years old. Henry's eyes her own chin, and somehow a wisdom that belonged to neither of them. "It's complicated, Clara, because of Papa. Partly. Papa's been gone 2 years. I know how long your father's been gone." Clara was quiet a moment. Then, "He makes you stand different." Anna blinked. "What?" "When he's here, you stand different. You don't do the thing you do." She demonstrated, pulling her shoulders slightly in the subtle concave posture of someone braced for impact. "You just stand normal." Anna didn't have an answer for that. She turned back to the counter and picked up the dish towel again, and Clara went off to find her sister, and Anna stood there and thought about standing normal and what it had cost her not to, and how long she'd been paying that cost without realizing it had a name. He asked if he could take her for a ride on the fourth Sunday. "Not far," he said. "Just out along the edge of the Hallett property and back." He'd have her home before the children needed supper. Mrs. Pruitt had already agreed to sit with them, he said, and then seemed to understand from her expression that this required explanation. "I asked her before I asked you," he admitted. "I wanted to make sure there was no obstacle before I put you in a position of having to find one." She stared at him. "You are a very deliberate man, Mr. Carter. I've been told," he said. She went on the ride. They rode without talking for a while, which she had expected to feel uncomfortable, and didn't. He had a way of occupying silence that didn't make her feel like she was supposed to fill it. The land was starting to soften toward spring, the first pale green at the edges of things, and the sky over Nebraska was the particular shade of blue that happened in late March when winter let go of its grip without quite admitting it had done so. "Tell me about your husband," he said. She looked at him sharply. "Only if you want to," he added, not retreating, just clarifying. She thought about saying no. She had said no in her head in the half-second before she actually spoke. "Henry was a good man," she said. "He was funny. People don't expect that they see a farmer and they think serious, but Henry made everybody laugh. He was the one who wanted to come out here. I thought he was crazy." She paused. "I was right. And we came anyway, and for 3 years it was good. It was really good." He waited. "Then the drought hit," she said. "And it was like watching him disappear, not physically. He was there. But whatever held him together started to. He blamed himself for everything. For the land. For the debt. For bringing us out here. I kept telling him we'd get through it, and he kept not believing me. And then he got sick in January and just..." She stopped. "He was gone in 10 days. Pneumonia. 10 days. The horses moved beneath them. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. And he said it plain, without the usual texture. People layered over those words. The self-consciousness, the inadequacy, the hurry to move past it. Just plain. "He would have liked you," she said, which surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him, because she hadn't planned to say it and wasn't entirely sure it was true, and also knew somehow that it was. He respected men who did what they said they'd do. Ethan was quiet a moment. "What do you respect?" She looked at him. Men who ask that question instead of assuming they already know the answer. Something shifted in his face. That almost smile again. She was beginning to catalog them, the different shades of almost smile, and what each one meant, which was a dangerous thing to be doing, and she knew it. "Anna," he said. It was the first time he'd used her first name. He'd waited 4 Sundays to use it, which was either old-fashioned or deliberate, and she suspected it was both. "I want to be honest with you." "All right. I'm not a wealthy man. I've got steady work, and I'm good at it, and I've got enough saved that I'm not living hand to mouth, but I'm not going to offer you and your children an easy life. I can offer you a real one. I can offer you somebody who shows up." He paused. "I want you to know what you'd actually be considering, not a version of it." She looked at him for a long time. Most men, she said, in my experience, tell you what they think you want to hear. I noticed, he said, that hadn't worked out particularly well for you. She laughed. It came out of her before she could hold it back, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, and it startled her as much as anything had in months. She pressed her hand briefly to her mouth, and Ethan looked at her with something in his face that wasn't quite the almost smile, something softer and more unguarded, and she thought, there it is. That's the thing I've been watching for and didn't know it. Mr. Carter, she said when she'd recovered. Ethan. Ethan. The name felt different in her mouth than she'd expected. I have 3 children. My son is already half convinced he needs to protect me from the world, and he's 6 years old. My eldest daughter is watching you like a hawk watches a rabbit, and she will not stop watching, and if she decides she doesn't trust you, there is no power in Nebraska that will change her mind. I know, he said. I've noticed. And I am not... She stopped. Started again. I loved Henry. Whatever I do from here has to be real. I can't... She stopped again. I can't do something careful just because it's practical. I won't. I'm not asking you to be careful, he said. He said it quietly, but with the same unhurried certainty he'd said everything since the auction square. I'm asking you to give me enough time to show you I mean what I say, that's all. They rode back to the farm, mostly in silence again, but it was a different silence than before. It had weight in it, but not the bad kind, the kind that means something has been said that needed saying, and the air is adjusting to it. At the gate, he dismounted and held her horse steady while she climbed down, and when her feet hit the ground, she was closer to him than she'd planned, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Same time next Sunday, he said. She stepped back, straightened her coat, looked at him with her chin at that angle. Don't be late, she said. She went inside and closed the door and leaned against it in the hallway for exactly 3 seconds before Clara's voice came from the kitchen. How was it? Fine, Anna said. Mama. It was fine, Clara. A pause, then from Ida. Did he hold your hand? Absolutely not. Did you want him to? Anna closed her eyes. She pushed off the door and walked toward the kitchen, and the children were waiting with their various faces. Clara measuring Ida delighted James, standing by the window with his arms at his sides, watching the road where a man on a dark bay horse was riding away, and Anna took a breath and started making supper, and said nothing more about it. But James, still looking at the road, said very quietly. He waved. No one asked him what he meant. They all understood. A man who waves at a boy when he thinks no one's watching is telling you something. And James, who had spent 6 years learning to read his father's silences, knew exactly what it was. He didn't say anything else, but he unfolded his arms and sat down at the table. And Anna, her back turned, stirring the pot, felt it. Felt the shift in the room, small and silent as a season changing, and said nothing and held very still and let it settle. The 5th Sunday, Ethan didn't come alone. Anna saw it from the window. The dark bay horse, and beside it, a second horse, carrying a man she didn't recognize. Older, with a white beard, and a deliberate way of sitting in the saddle that told her he'd been riding longer than she'd been alive. She had just enough time to feel the spike of something, not quite alarm, not quite irritation, before Ethan knocked. She opened the door. Mrs. Miller. Hat in hand, same as always. I apologize for the surprise. This is Roy Hallett. He owns the ranch where I work. He wanted to meet you. She looked at Roy Hallett, who looked back at her with eyes the color of creek water and a face that had been weathered past the point where age was easy to read. Ma'am, he said. He didn't remove his hat. He tipped it, which was a different thing and meant something different, not deference, but acknowledgement. I've heard considerable about you. Have you? She said. Not a question. All good, he said. Though I suspect you're not the kind of woman who needs to be told that. She looked at Ethan. He had the expression of a man who had arranged something he believed was well-intentioned and was now uncertain whether it was going to be received that way. Good, she thought. He should be uncertain. Come in, she said. "I'll make more coffee." She made them sit in the front room while she went to the kitchen, and Clara materialized at her elbow within 30 seconds, because Clara had sonar for interesting situations. "Who's the old man?" "His employer." "Why is his employer here?" "I don't know yet," Anna said, which was honest. "Go sit with your sister." "I want to listen." Clara. "Mama, I have better judgment than you think I do." Anna looked at her daughter. "I know you do. Go sit with your sister." She brought the coffee out and sat across from both men and folded her hands in her lap and waited, because, whatever this was, she was not going to make it easier by filling the silence first. Roy Hallett looked at his coffee. Then he looked at her. "Ethan tells me you've got a farm that's been sitting fallow since your husband passed." 40 acres, she said. "The debt was cleared when we sold the equipment. The land's mine." 40 acres of Nebraska bottomland, he said. "That's not nothing." "No," she agreed. "It's not. I run 800 head on the east property," he said. "I've been looking to expand my grazing access. Your 40 acres sits directly between my east pasture and the creek." He paused. "I'd like to make you an offer. A lease arrangement. Enough per year that you wouldn't need to worry about the kind of thing that happened at that auction." The room was very still. Anna looked at Ethan. His face was carefully neutral, not hiding something she thought, but giving her room to react without his reaction influencing hers. She had been learning to read him, and what she read now was, "This is not a trap." But she also read this was his idea, and he wanted it to help you, and he does not know if you'll let it. She looked back at Roy Hallett. "Did Ethan ask you to come here?" Hallett glanced at Ethan. A brief look, the look between men who have already discussed what to say. "He mentioned the situation." "I want to know exactly what he said." Hallett set his coffee cup down. He was a man she could tell who was not accustomed to being questioned by women in their own front rooms, and to his considerable credit, he adjusted to it without making it a thing. "He said you were a woman of good sense, who'd had a hard 2 years, and deserved a straight offer instead of being made to feel like charity. He said if I came myself and made it a business proposition, you'd consider it. If he arranged it behind the scenes, you'd refuse out of principle." She looked at Ethan again. "You said that?" she asked. "More or less," he said. "You told him I'd refuse out of principle." "I told him you had principles," he said. "That's not the same as a flaw." She held his gaze for a moment longer than she meant to. Then she looked at Roy Hallett and they talked numbers. Real numbers, and it was a fair offer, genuinely fair. The kind that didn't leave her feeling like she was being managed. And when Hallett left 40 minutes later, she stood in the doorway and watched him ride out, and felt the particular sensation of solid ground appearing under her feet where she had expected nothing. Ethan stayed. They sat on the porch steps because the afternoon was mild enough and the children had flooded the kitchen. He had his elbows on his knees and she had her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, and for a while, neither of them spoke. "You could have just told me," she finally said. "You would have said no." "Probably." "See?" She looked at the side of his face. "That is a very fine line between helpful and managing me, Ethan Carter." He turned to look at her. "I know it. I walked it careful." She held his gaze. Something tightened in her chest, not unpleasantly. "Don't make a habit of deciding what's good for me without asking." "I won't," he said. And the way he said it, no qualification, no defensive explanation, told her he meant it, which was the most disarming thing he could have done. James appeared in his doorway. He looked at the two of them sitting on the steps and for a moment said nothing, working something out in his private 6-year-old arithmetic. Then, "Ethan, you know how to fix a fence post?" Ethan looked at him. "I do. The one on the east side of the barn's been leaning since November. Mama keeps meaning to fix it." "James," Anna started. "I'm just saying it's been leaning," James said with elaborate innocence. Ethan stood up. He looked down at Anna with the question in his face, and she looked up at him and felt absurdly like laughing again, the same unguarded way she had on the ride, that sudden helpless amusement that she'd forgotten she was capable of. "The tools are in the barn," she said. She watched them walk around the corner of the house together. The man and the boy, one tall and one trying to be, and Clara came to stand beside her in the doorway. "He passed the James test," Clara said. "There's a James test. There's always been a James test, Mama. You just didn't know about it." Anna looked at her daughter. "What does the James test involve?" "Asking for help with something real," Clara said. "Not something made up, something that actually needs doing." She paused. "Papa used to say you could tell everything about a man by whether he complained when the work was harder than he expected." Anna's throat closed briefly. She breathed through it. "Your father said that. He said it to me the summer before he died," Clara said quietly. "I've been waiting to see if it was true." She went back inside. Anna stood in the doorway and listened to the sound of her son's voice carrying from around the barn, explaining the fence post, with considerable authority, and Ethan's quieter response and the particular silence of someone listening rather than waiting to talk. She pressed her hand flat against the doorframe and breathed. 3 weeks later, the trouble came, the way trouble in small towns always comes sideways from a direction you weren't watching. It came in the form of Gerald Marsh. He was the son of the man who held the mortgage on 2 properties adjacent to hers, a man in his late 30s, with the soft hands of someone who handled money rather than worked for it, and a way of standing that reminded Anna of a man measuring a room to see if his furniture would fit. He'd looked at her once or twice at church since Henry died, and she'd noticed without encouraging it, and assumed he would eventually redirect his attention somewhere more receptive. She was wrong. He came to her farm on a Tuesday afternoon, a deliberate choice of day. She understood immediately, because Tuesday was when Ethan was furthest out on the East Range and wouldn't come by until Sunday. She didn't know how Gerald Marsh knew Ethan's schedule, but the calculation in his timing told her he did. She was in the kitchen when she heard the knock. He came in when she answered, which she hadn't quite invited him to do, and stood in her kitchen with his hat on, a different thing from tipping it, a different thing from holding it, and looked around in the way she'd noticed some men do cataloging. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," she said pleasantly. "What can I do for you, Mr. Marsh?" "I wanted to speak to you about the land," he said. "I understand you've entered into a lease arrangement with Roy Hallett." She waited. "My father has some concerns," he said. "The lease puts Hallett cattle on land that borders our east property. There are questions about water access from the creek." "The lease was reviewed and registered properly," she said. "There are no water disputes." "My father believes there may be." She looked at him steadily. "Then your father should speak to Mr. Hallett's attorney." Gerald Marsh smiled. It was the smile of a man who was trying to appear harmless and hadn't quite managed it. "There's a simpler resolution," he said. "If you were to sell the 40 acres rather than lease it." "I'm not selling." "My father would offer a fair price. You'd have cash in hand instead of a lease arrangement that depends on Hallett's goodwill continuing." "Mr. Marsh." Her voice had gone flat and clear as window glass. "I am not selling my land. Not to your father, not to anyone. The lease with Mr. Hallett is signed, and it is my business and no one else's. Is there something else I can help you with?" He held her gaze a moment. The smile changed quality, not dropping exactly, but revealing something underneath it that she didn't like. "You're a woman alone with 3 children and 40 acres, Mrs. Miller. Arrangements can shift. Circumstances change." He paused. "It would be a pity to find yourself in a difficult position again." The kitchen was very quiet. Anna felt the cold move through her, the particular cold of a threat dressed as concern. She had felt it before from the bankmen, from creditors, and she knew exactly what it was, and knowing what it was made her calmer rather than less, because calm was what she had instead of power, and she had learned to use it well. "Mr. Marsh," she said, "get out of my house." He left. He went slowly, deliberately slowly, the way men go, who want you to know they're choosing to go, that it's not your doing. She stood in the kitchen and listened to his horse leaving, and then sat down at the table because her legs had decided they were done pretending. Clara appeared in the doorway. "Who was that?" "Nobody important." Then she stopped herself. She had made a decision 2 years ago not to lie to her children about hard things because the lies required maintenance and the truth just required courage. "A man trying to make me afraid," she said. "It didn't work." Clara came and sat across from her. What did he want? The land. Are you going to give it to him? No. Is he going to cause trouble? Anna looked at her daughter. Probably. Clara nodded slowly, with the expression of someone filing information rather than panicking about it. Are you going to tell Ethan? And there it was. Not should we worry, or what do we do but the instinctive, unsentimental reaching for the person they had all without declaration begun to rely on. Her 9-year-old daughter had named it before Anna had let herself. Yes, Anna said. I'll tell him Sunday. She didn't wait until Sunday. She sent a note with a ranch hand passing through on Wednesday, and on Thursday evening. Ethan rode up to the farm just before supper, and she came out to meet him at the gate and told him everything while the children were inside, and the light went low and orange over the flat land. He listened the whole way through without interrupting. His jaw tightened once at the pity, to find yourself in a difficult position part. But his voice when he spoke was even. Marcia's father has been trying to expand his water access for 2 years, he said. Roy knows about it. This is him trying a different angle. Using me as leverage. Yes. Against Hallett. Yes. He looked at her. Anna, this isn't your fault, and it's not going to fall on you alone. Roy has lawyers. The lease is solid. Marsh is rattling something that won't move. She looked at him. You sound very sure. I am sure about the legal part. He paused. The other part, the part where he came to your house and made that kind of remark, I want you to tell me if he comes back. I handled it. I know you did. He said it without pause, without the qualifier she'd half expected, but, in the absence of it, settled something. I'm asking you to tell me anyway. Not because you need help. Because I want to know. She looked at him for a long moment in the failing light. Why? He met her eyes. Because what happens to you matters to me. It's as simple as that. She had not heard anyone say that to her in 2 years. Not in that plain, ungarnished way. She had heard pity and advice and gentle suggestions about what came next, and she had heard kindness that came wrapped in other things. But she had not heard someone say, what happens to you matters to me with that particular absence of complication. She felt it go through her like water through dry ground. All right, she said. Her voice was steady. She had made it steady. I'll tell you. He nodded. He didn't push it further. He had the judgment to know when a moment didn't need to be extended, which was rarer than it should have been, and which she had begun to understand was one of the things about him that made her feel for the first time in 2 years like she might be allowed to breathe. He stayed for supper. It was the first time. She hadn't planned it. She simply hadn't told him to go, and he hadn't gone, and by the time the food was on the table, it would have been strange to send him away. So he sat at her kitchen table and ate with her children, and James explained the current structural issues with the fence post repair, with the seriousness of a man presenting a business case, and Ida told an entirely fictional story about Daisy's behavior that morning that had some basis in events, but had been considerably embellished, and Clara said almost nothing and watched almost everything. When Ethan left, James went to bed without being asked, which had happened approximately never. Anna was washing dishes when Clara came to stand beside her, picked up a dish towel without being asked, and began drying. He's going to ask you, Clara said. Anna kept washing. Ask me what? You know what? She did know. She had known it for 2 weeks in the way you know things you're not ready to say out loud because saying them makes them real. She had been carrying it carefully at a distance, examining it from angles where it was still just a possibility and not a weight she had to decide whether to bear. And when he does, Anna said. Clara dried a cup, set it down. I think, she said carefully in the measured voice of someone who had thought about this considerably more than she'd let on, that Papa would want you to stop being so afraid of being happy. Anna stopped washing. She stood there with her hands in the water and said nothing for a long moment. "Clara," she finally managed. "I know," her daughter said quietly. "I know, Mama." She put the dish towel down and hugged her from behind, the way she used to when she was small arms around Anna's waist, and her face against her mother's back, and Anna gripped the edge of the sink and held on. Outside, a coyote called once across the flat, dark land. Inside, the kitchen was warm, and the lamp was burning, and Anna Miller stood with her daughter's arms around her, and felt for the first time in a very long time that the ground beneath her feet might actually hold. Gerald Marsh did come back, not to the farm. He was smarter than that, and Anna had made it clear enough that another visit to her kitchen would not be welcome. He came back in the way men like him always did, through other people, through whispers, through the slow erosion of reputation that didn't require him to get his hands dirty. It started at church. Anna noticed it the second Sunday after his visit. The way Mrs. Holt's smile went a fraction too careful when they spoke after the service. The way two women she'd known for 6 years found reasons to drift toward the other side of the churchyard. She noticed it because she'd been through 2 years of widowhood and knew exactly what genuine sympathy looked like versus what performed distance looked like, and these women were performing something. She found out what through Mabel Pruitt, who was 73 years old and had approximately no patience for social delicacy, and who caught Anna by the arm on the way to her wagon and said without preamble, "You ought to know that Gerald Marsh has been telling people your arrangement with Hallett is improper." Anna went very still. Improper? He's suggesting that Ethan Carter negotiated the lease for personal reasons, that it looks he used the word unseemly. Mabel's expression made it clear what she thought of that word. He's saying a widow with 3 children ought to be more careful about appearances. The cold came back. The same cold from her kitchen, but sharper now with an edge. Because she understood immediately what Marsh was doing, not attacking the lease, which was legally solid, but attacking her, which cost him nothing, and might cost her everything, in a town where reputation was the only currency a woman without land or money or a husband's name truly owned. "What are people saying?" she asked. Mabel looked at her with those creek-water eyes that reminded her oddly of Roy Hallett. "Some are listening," she said honestly. "Most aren't yet, but yet is doing a lot of work in that sentence, Anna." She drove home with her hands tight on the reins and her jaw set, and 3 children in the back of the wagon who sensed enough to stay quiet. That evening, she wrote Ethan a note. Then she sat with it for an hour and didn't send it, because she was still after everything trying to determine where the line was between asking for help and surrendering something she needed to keep. The independence wasn't pride. It wasn't stubbornness for its own sake. It was the knowledge that a woman who couldn't stand on her own ground was a woman whose ground could always be taken. She sent the note. He arrived the next evening earlier than she expected, which told her he'd ridden harder than the distance required. She told him about Marsh. All of it Mabel's warning the churchyard, the word unseemly, and she watched his face as she talked. The jaw tightened. His eyes went to the middle distance for a moment, the way they did when he was thinking, rather than reacting. Then they came back to her. "He's trying to isolate you," Ethan said. "From the lease, from Hallett's protection, from the town's goodwill. If you're managing it alone without community support, the land becomes vulnerable." "I know what he's doing," she said. "I want to know what to do about it." He was quiet a moment. "Roy needs to know. He'll want to address it directly. Marsh has been picking at the edges of his operation for 2 years, and Roy's got no patience left for it." "That's the business part," she said. "What about the other part, the unseemly part?" He looked at her directly. "What do you want to do about that part?" She had not expected him to throw it back to her. She had braced for him to have an answer to offer something, and instead he had simply asked, which was, she recognized. It recognized it, and felt it in equal measure his way of treating her like someone who got to make her own decisions. "I don't know," she said honestly. "What can I do?" "A woman in my position can't fight rumors directly. The more you deny something, the more people think the smoke means fire." "No," he agreed. "You can't fight them. You can change what they're about." He paused. "Anna." Something in his tone shifted. She felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure. Before weather comes, the quality of the room becoming different, without anything visible changing. "There's something I've been wanting to say to you," he said. "I've been waiting for what I thought was the right time. I'm starting to understand the right time isn't coming. Something always gets in the way because that's just the nature of lives like ours." He stopped, breathed, started again. "I would like to marry you. I want to say that plainly and let you sit with it and not pressure you about when or how or whether, but I need you to know that's where I stand." The kitchen was absolutely silent. Anna looked at him. She had known it was coming. Clara had been right. She had known, and knowing had not prepared her even slightly for the way the air left her lungs when he actually said it. She felt it move through her in a wave, warm and terrifying in equal measure, and she made herself stay with both of those things, rather than retreating into either. "Ethan, you don't have to answer now," he said quickly. "I mean that. I'm not—" "Let me talk," she said. He stopped. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at them for a moment, and then looked up at him, and made herself be as honest as he had always been with her because he deserved that, and more to the point, so did she. "I'm afraid," she said. "I want you to know that's what this is. Not reluctance. I'm not uncertain about who you are. I've been watching you for 3 months and I know who you are. I'm afraid of what happens if I let myself need someone again and—" She stopped. "Henry didn't choose to leave. He got sick and he died, and it wasn't anyone's fault. But I almost didn't survive it. Not the money, not the farm, I almost didn't survive it inside. And I have 3 children who need me to survive." He hadn't moved. He was watching her with those steady dark eyes and the whole weight of his attention, and it didn't feel like pressure, it felt like being held upright. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not sure you do. I know because you told me," he said. "On that ride. You told me Henry disappeared before he was gone, that the grief started before the death, and that's the worst kind. And I know that a woman who went through that, and then stood up in an auction square with her back straight and led her cow out herself." His voice changed slightly, not breaking, but bending. "Anna, I am not asking you to be unafraid. I'm asking if the fear is the only thing in the room, or if there's something else in there too." She stared at him. "Is there?" he said. The silence lasted long enough that she heard the lamp flicker. "Yes," she said. "There is something else." He exhaled, slow and quiet, like he'd been holding it. "Then I'll wait," he said. "As long as you need." The kitchen door swung open, and James appeared in his nightshirt with his hair disordered from sleep, and an expression of complete imperviousness to the atmosphere in the room. "Mama Ida's crying because she dreamed Daisy ran away." Anna looked at her son, then at Ethan, then back at her son. "Go get your sister," she said. "Bring her here." Ethan stood up. "I should—" "Sit down," she said. "Please." He sat. James reappeared with Ida in tow, Ida still damp-eyed and clutching a rag doll, and stopping dead when she saw Ethan at the table. "You're still here," she said, with the uncomplicated pleasure of a 7-year-old who hadn't yet learned to find that complicated. "Still here," he confirmed. She climbed immediately into the chair beside him, not beside her mother beside him, and announced that Daisy had been in her dream and had been trying to tell her something important. But she woke up before she could hear it. "What do you think she was trying to say?" Ethan asked with perfect seriousness. Ida considered this at great length. Probably that she needed more apples, she concluded. Probably, he agreed. James sat across from them and watched this exchange with his arms folded on the table and something moving through his face that Anna caught only because she'd spent 6 years learning to read him. It was something careful being released. Something that had been held tight for a long time, unclenching just slightly at the edges. She looked at Ethan, and he looked at her over Ida's head, and she thought this. This is what the fear is trying to take from me. Not safety. This. She didn't say yes that night. She needed the space she'd asked for, and he gave it to her completely, without the small subterranean pressures that men used when they said they'd wait but didn't mean it. The following week, he was simply himself, Sunday, at two hat in hand, coffee at the table fence posts, and patient attention, and the quiet, steady presence that had restructured the air of her house so gradually she hadn't noticed it happening until it was simply the air she breathed. The crisis came on a Thursday, 12 days after his proposal from a direction none of them had anticipated. Roy Hallett rode up to the farm mid-morning, without Ethan moving with the urgency of a man who had set aside other things to come. Anna came out to meet him at the gate, and knew from his face before he spoke that something had shifted. Marsh filed a formal complaint with the county, Hallett said, dismounting. He's claiming the lease arrangement is invalid because of a boundary survey discrepancy on the eastern edge of your 40 acres. He's got a surveyor, his father's man, saying 12 of your acres legally fall under a disputed easement. She felt the cold move through her again, deeper this time. That's not possible. Henry had the land surveyed before we bought it. I know. I've got my attorney pulling the original survey records today. His voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger under it. The careful, managed anger of a man who'd been in business long enough to know that losing your head cost you time. This is going to get resolved, Anna. The records will bear out. But it takes time, and in the meantime, Marsh can tie up the lease in county proceedings long enough to cause us both problems. How long? Months, potentially, if he drags it. She was quiet for a moment. The land, always the land. It was the one thing she had that was unambiguously hers, and he had found the thread to pull. What do you need from me? She asked. Signed authorization for my attorney to access the original deed, Hallett said. And I need you to stay steady. He's hoping this rattles you enough that you come to him to settle. Don't. I won't. He looked at her. I know you won't. He paused. Ethan doesn't know yet. I wanted to tell you first. She looked up at him sharply. Why? Because it's your land, he said simply. And because you deserve to be the one who decides when and how he finds out. She stood at the gate for a long time after he rode off, turning that over. You deserve to be the one who decides. Two different men, she thought, and both of them had somehow understood the one thing she'd needed most to not be managed. To be informed and trusted and left to make her own choices. She told Ethan that evening when he came by after his shift on the range, still dusty from the day's work. She told him standing on the porch and watched his face move through several things in quick succession. The tightening jaw, the flash of something that was anger, but not at her, and then the deliberate settling into steadiness that she had come to recognize as his chosen response to crisis. Marsh is going to lose the survey dispute, he said. Roy's attorney is one of the best in the county. I know that. Then what are you afraid of? She looked at him. That it doesn't matter if he loses, she said. That by the time it's over, the damage to my reputation in this town is already done. That people have already decided what to think about a widow who leased her land and let a cowboy court her and... She stopped. I've been so careful. My whole life here I've been careful about what people see and what they think, and I'm tired, Ethan. I am so tired of being careful. He stepped closer, not invading, just closing the distance. Then stop, he said. She stared at him. Stop being careful for them, he said. Be careful for yourself. Be careful for your children. But stop carrying what this town thinks of you like it's your job to manage it. His voice was low and even and completely certain. You are the most capable woman I have ever met, and you have spent 2 years apologizing for needing things. You don't owe this town your dignity. She felt her eyes go hot. She did not cry. She hadn't cried in front of anyone since the week Henry died, and she had decided then that tears were for private, and she would not change that now. But the heat was there, real and sudden. You don't know what it costs, she said. A woman alone in a town like this. You won't be alone, he said. She looked at him. I'm asking you again, he said quietly. Not because of Marsh, not because of the town, because of what you said in this kitchen, that there was something else in the room besides the fear. I'm asking what that something else is telling you. The wind moved across the flat, dark land, and the lamp inside threw its warm shape through the kitchen window, and somewhere around the barn, she could hear Daisy shift and settle. She thought about Clara saying Papa would want you to stop being so afraid of being happy. She thought about James unfolding his arms. She thought about Ida climbing into the chair beside him, like it was simply the right place to be. She looked at this man standing on her porch in the dark with the day's dust still on him, and his hat in his hands, and the whole weight of his patient, unhurried certainty, and she thought, I have been waiting 2 years for the ground to be solid enough. Maybe this is as solid as ground gets. Yes, she said. He went still. Yes, she said again. Steadier. My answer is yes. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he exhaled, and it was the same exhale as in the kitchen when she'd told him there was something else in the room, that long, slow release of something held, but deeper now. He reached out and took her hand, both of his around hers, the way you hold something you're afraid of dropping. You're sure, he said, not doubting, checking. Because he was that kind of man. I'm terrified, she said honestly. That's different from unsure. He looked at her with that expression that wasn't quite the almost smile, but was its own thing. Something open and unguarded and entirely real, and she thought, standing there in the dark, with her hand in his, that this was what it felt like when something began, instead of ended. I'll speak to your children tomorrow, he said. Properly, all 3. James might cross-examine you. I'd expect nothing less. Ida will probably try to involve Daisy somehow. Also expected, and Clara. She stopped. Clara already knows, he said quietly. She blinked. What? I think she's known for about 6 weeks. He paused. She told me last Sunday when you were inside with Ida that if I made you cry, she would make my life considerably difficult. She was very specific about how. Anna stared at him. She said that, in almost exactly those words. She also said... He paused again, and something moved through his face that she needed a moment to identify. And when she identified it, she understood it was the thing people looked like when they were trying not to show that something had moved them nearly past the point of managing. She said her father would have shaken my hand. Anna pressed her free hand briefly to her mouth. The lamp burned inside. The children slept. The Nebraska dark stretched wide and flat and patient around them, the same dark that had felt like a wall for 2 years. And tonight felt like space open and quiet, and full of something she was only just beginning to let herself call the future. Don't be late tomorrow, she said softly. Never, he said. He came at 8 o'clock the next morning. Anna heard the horse before she saw him, and she was already at the window when he rode up earlier than she'd expected, which she was learning meant something had made him move faster than planned. She opened the door before he knocked, and he stepped inside and looked at her with a face that told her immediately the morning had already been eventful. Marsh withdrew the survey complaint, he said. She stared at him. What? Roy's attorney filed the original deed and survey with the county clerk yesterday evening. The records were clean, no discrepancy, no easement. Marsh's surveyor had falsified the boundary markers. He paused. Roy went to Marsh's father this morning before sunrise. I don't know exactly what was said, but the complaint was formally withdrawn by 7. Anna sat down in the kitchen chair. The feeling that moved through her was not the triumph she might have expected. It was something quieter, more complicated. The kind of relief that arrives so late, it feels almost indistinguishable from grief. It's over, she said. The legal piece is over. He sat across from her. The rest of it, the town, the talk that takes longer to die down. But it will. She looked at him for a moment. You went to Roy last night. He didn't answer immediately. Ethan. After I left here, he said. Yes, I rode to the ranch and told him what Marsh's surveyor had done. He already suspected, but he needed to know it was confirmed. He met her eyes. I should have told you I was going to do that. Yes, she said. You should have. You're right. No defense, no explanation layered over it. She looked at him a moment longer, and the irritation moved through her and past her because it had nothing underneath it to hold on to. He had acted. He had told her he was acknowledging the misstep, and those three things together were more than most men managed in a month. "The children are in the barn," she said. Ida convinced James that Daisy needed her hooves checked, which is not a real thing, but it got them both outside. "Clara is..." "Right here," Clara said from the hallway doorway. She was dressed for school. Her coat buttoned her school bag over one shoulder, standing with the stillness of someone who had been listening for a while. She looked at Ethan with those measuring eyes, and then at her mother, and then back at Ethan. "You're going to talk to us today," she said. "Not a question." "I am," he said. "If that's all right with you." She considered him. "Are you going to make it a big thing with a speech?" "No." "Good," she said. "James hates speeches. He'll interrupt you." She shifted her school bag. "I already know what you're going to say anyway." "I figured you might." "I have one condition," she said. Anna looked at her daughter. "Clara, one condition," Clara repeated, looking at Ethan with the focused directness of someone who had thought about this carefully and was not going to be deflected. "You don't replace him. You don't try to be Papa, and you don't pretend we've always been a family, and you don't ask us to forget. You're something new. That's the only thing I need." The kitchen was very still. Ethan held her gaze. "You have my word," he said, "on all of it." Something shifted in Clara's face. Not the wall coming down, more like a door slightly opened. She nodded once, precise and deliberate, and then she said she was going to be late for school and walked out, and they heard the front door close behind her, and Anna let out a breath she'd been holding since the hallway. "She's 9 years old," she said. "She's about 40. Ethan said quietly. "And she's going to be extraordinary." He went to the barn. Anna didn't follow. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the barn door and folded her hands and let the moment be what it was, because she had learned over the past 3 months that trying to manage every moment was exhausting and usually unnecessary. It took longer than she expected. 20 minutes. She was starting to imagine increasingly dramatic scenarios when the barn door opened and James came out first, walking with his chin elevated and his shoulders back in that posture of masculine gravity that he'd been perfecting since February. He walked to the fence post, the one he and Ethan had repaired together, the first one, and leaned against it with his arms crossed, and looked at the horizon with the expression of a man processing something significant. Ethan came out next, carrying Ida, who had her arms around his neck and appeared to be telling him something at length and with considerable enthusiasm. Anna watched Ethan's face as he listened, watched him nod, watched him say something that made Ida lean back to look at him, and then burst out laughing. Watched him set her down and say something to James, and James uncross his arms and respond. And then, almost imperceptibly, almost too small to see from a kitchen window, James's hand moved and gripped Ethan's sleeve for just a moment, 1 second, and then let go and stepped away and was 6 years old again, pretending he hadn't done it. Anna pressed her hand flat against the windowsill. She was not going to cry in front of the window. She had made this decision and she was going to stand by it. She cried a little bit, in front of the window, just briefly. They were married 3 weeks later. Not a large wedding. Anna had no family within 500 miles, and hadn't for years, and Ethan's family was scattered, a brother in Wyoming. He wrote to occasionally parents long gone. Roy Hallett came, and Mabel Pruitt, who wore her best dress and wept openly and unapologetically throughout the entire proceeding. The Reverend spoke plainly and well, and kept it short because Anna had asked him to. Clara stood at her mother's side, with her hands folded and her face composed, watching everything. James stood beside Ethan because he had been asked and had agreed, and then spent a week trying to act like it meant nothing, and then stopped trying. Ida wove flowers into Daisy's rope because she had decided Daisy should be present, and no one had had the heart to tell her otherwise. And so Daisy stood at the edge of the churchyard and ate grass through the entire ceremony, which Ida later declared was Daisy's way of celebrating, when the Reverend said Ethan could kiss his bride. Anna looked up at the man she was marrying and thought clearly and without drama, "I did not expect this. I did not plan for this. And I am so grateful I was wrong about what I deserved." He kissed her gently. James made a noise. Ida cheered. Clara rolled her eyes with such precision it was almost artistic. Roy Hallett clapped once loud, like a man concluding a business meeting he was satisfied with. Mabel Pruitt sobbed. The first year was hard, in the way that first years are not with crisis, but with the harder, quieter work of becoming something that had never existed before. Two families that were really one family learning to share a grammar. Learning whose silences meant what, whose anger looked like withdrawal, and whose looked like noise. How to fight, and how to recover from fighting. How to make room for grief and joy in the same house without letting one crowd out the other. Henry's picture stayed on the mantel. Ethan had never suggested otherwise, and Anna had watched for it. Watched for the small signs of a man uncomfortable with a predecessor, and found none. He walked past that photograph every day for years, and never once made it a thing. And that absence of making it a thing was itself a thing. And she loved him for it in a way that she couldn't have explained without sounding like she was diminishing what they'd built together, when actually it was the foundation of it. James was the hardest and also the clearest. He tested Ethan methodically, the way a person tests ice before they put their full weight on it. Not maliciously, just carefully. He had been carrying the weight of the house since he was 4 years old, in ways no one had asked him to, and he was not prepared to simply hand that over to someone he'd known for months. He argued. He pushed back on instructions. He went silent at dinner sometimes with a pointed blankness that had nothing to do with the food. And Ethan every single time came back the next morning and treated him exactly the same. No cold shoulder, no wounded withdrawal, no escalation. Just the same steady present, unamused patience. And eventually, James ran out of ice to test because the same answer kept coming back solid. It's solid. Put your weight on it. It was a Tuesday in October, 7 months after the wedding, when James came in from helping with the cattle work and sat down at the supper table and said to Anna without setup or ceremony, "Ethan said I could ride out with the hands next Saturday to the North Pasture." "Did he?" Anna said. "If it's all right with you." He paused. "He said it's always got to be all right with you." She looked at her son. 7 years old now, taller than he'd been in the spring, with his father's eyes and something around his jaw that was starting to look new. Not Henry, not Ethan, something that was going to be entirely James. "It's all right with me," she said. He nodded, serious as a judge. Then he picked up his fork and ate his supper. That night, after the children were asleep, she told Ethan what James had said, and he listened. And when she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then said, "He asked me last week if he could call me something other than Ethan." She went still. "What did you say?" "I said he could call me whatever felt right." He paused. "He hasn't said anything since." "I think he's deciding." She looked at him in the lamplight. This man who had walked into an auction square and turned the direction of her life with a $10 bid, and the decision to see her instead of her circumstances. And she thought about what it took to be that kind of patient. Not passive, not resigned. Patient, which was an active thing, a daily choice, a decision made every morning to show up the same way regardless of what the day handed back. "I love you," she said. She had said it before. She'd been saying it for months, had said it first on a cold November evening, when it came out of her before she'd organized herself around it, and he had looked at her like a man who'd found water in drought country. But it was different now. It had accumulated. It had layers under it. The October suppers and the fence posts and Daisy's hooves and Clara's condition and James in the North Pasture and the photograph on the mantel and all the ordinary irreplaceable mornings of a life being built. And she wanted him to hear all of that in it. From his face he did. The survey dispute resolved fully in November. Roy Hallett's attorney presented the original deed in county court. Marsh's falsified survey was entered into the record as fraudulent, and Gerald Marsh was formally censured and ordered to pay court costs. He moved his interest to a county further west within the year, and was not much discussed in Grover's Hollow after that, except occasionally as a cautionary tale about underestimating women who had already survived worse than you. The lease held, the 40 acres held, the family held. Spring came again, and with it the first real expansion. Ethan negotiating with Roy to take on additional foreman responsibilities in exchange for a small ownership stake in the cattle operation. The kind of slow, careful accumulation that built something real rather than something borrowed. He brought Anna into every discussion, spread the ledgers on the kitchen table, and went through them with her line by line. Because he understood, had always understood, that a woman who had counted dried beans in the dark before her children woke was a woman who could read a balance sheet and should be trusted to. She had opinions, strong ones. He listened to all of them. The ranch grew, not quickly, not dramatically, the way honest things grew through work and time, and the accumulation of small right decisions made consistently over years. By the time Clara was 14, she was already helping Anna with the books, and by 15, she had announced her intention to become a teacher with the complete certainty of someone who had never considered another option, and Anna had looked at her daughter and thought about a 9-year-old in a doorway saying, "Your shoulders are doing that thing," and felt the fullness of it move through her chest like something breaking open. James grew into the ranch the way he grew into his boots, steadily, purposefully, always slightly ahead of what anyone expected. He was 11 when he rode out for a full week with the cattle drive, and came back 3 inches taller in a way that had nothing to do with his body. He was 12 when he started calling Ethan something other than Ethan. He didn't make an announcement. He didn't choose a name with ceremony or gravity. He was at the table one evening asking about the fence line repairs on the south pasture, and he said, "What do you think, Pa?" And then kept talking. Kept asking his question as if he hadn't said it, as if it had simply slipped into the sentence and belonged there. Ethan kept talking too, kept answering the question about the fence line. His voice was steady and practical and absolutely unremarkable. Anna was at the stove and could not see his face, and she did not turn around because she knew if she did, she would cry, and she was not going to cry, and also she knew somehow that the moment needed to breathe without being looked at. Later, when the children were in bed and she and Ethan were sitting on the porch in the dark, she heard him exhale once long and slow, and she reached over and put her hand over his, and neither of them said a word. Some things didn't require words. She had been learning that since the first Sunday, he sat at her kitchen table, and she understood it completely now. Ida grew up the way flowers grew sideways, unexpectedly bursting through whatever you thought contained her. She married at 22 a farmer from the neighboring county, who looked at her the way a man should look at a woman, and she moved 6 miles away and had 3 children of her own, and came back every Sunday for the rest of Anna's life as reliably as weather. She never stopped talking to Daisy's descendants. There were 2 cows by the time Ida had her first child, with the same absolute faith that they understood her, and her own children grew up believing the same thing, and Anna thought that was probably one of the best things she had given anyone. The years moved in the way good years do, too quickly, and not quickly enough, full of the texture of ordinary life that only reveals itself as extraordinary in retrospect. Hard winters, difficult calving seasons, the year the well needed replacing. The summer, Clara came home from her teaching post in the next county and announced she intended to apply to a school in Omaha. The night James sat down with Ethan and the Ledgers and asked questions about the operation that told them both he was ready to take it further. There were losses, too. Mabel Pruitt died at 81 peacefully, in her own bed, having spent her final years telling anyone who would listen about the widow and the cowboy from the auction square as though she had personally arranged it. Roy Hallett retired and handed the operation to his nephew and moved to his daughter's home in Kansas City, and before he left, he came to their farm and shook Ethan's hand for a long time, and told Anna that Ethan Carter was the best foreman he'd ever had and the second most stubborn man he'd ever known. "Who's the first?" Anna asked. He looked at her. "You," he said pleasantly, and put on his hat and rode out. She and Ethan were sitting on the porch the evening of their 20th anniversary when she heard him set his coffee cup down with that particular deliberateness that meant he was about to say something he'd been thinking about for a while. She waited. "You remember the auction?" he said. "Vaguely," she said dryly. "I was there," He smiled a real full smile, which she had been collecting for 20 years and never gotten tired of. "I walked in not knowing a soul," he said. "I'd been 3 years drifting between jobs, and I thought I was just passing through Grover's Hollow on the way to somewhere else." He paused. "Then I saw you walk into that square." She looked at him. "You decided in an auction square." "I decided when you held that rope," he said. "The way you held it. Like you were carrying the whole world on that rope, and you were going to stand there and hold it as long as it took." He was quiet a moment. "I thought that woman deserved somebody in her corner. And then I thought I'd like to be that person if she'll let me." She looked at him for a long time in the porch dark. The land around them was theirs now, not borrowed, not leased. Theirs worked for and paid for, year by year, expanded from 40 acres to something that would carry James and his children after him. The house had a new porch, added on the south side where the morning light came. There were 3 kinds of flowers in the kitchen garden, because Ida had planted them every spring since she was 7, and the habit had outlasted her living there. "I almost didn't let you," she said. "I know. I almost convinced myself the fear was the smart thing. I know that too." She reached over and took his hand. He closed his fingers around hers, the same way he had on the porch, the night she said yes. Both hands careful, like something he was afraid of dropping. He had never stopped doing that. 20 years, and he had never stopped holding her hand like it mattered. "It was the best decision I ever made," she said. Saying yes. He turned to look at her. His face in the evening light was older lined by years of weather and work, and entirely the same steady dark eyes, the same quality of unhurried certainty, the thing that had made her stop and look and eventually let herself believe that solid ground was real. "No," he said quietly. "The best decision you ever made was standing in that square with your head up when you had every reason not to. I just showed up afterward." He paused. "You were already doing it, Anna. I just got to stand next to you while you did." She pressed her hand briefly to her mouth. The lamp burned inside. She could hear Ida's youngest grandchild they were visiting for the week, making some kind of cheerful noise from the back bedroom. James had ridden out to the north pasture that morning and would be back before dark. Clara's last letter was on the kitchen table, full of her students and her life and her clear, measured, beautiful handwriting. 3 children who had survived and grown and made their own ground. A family built from a single act of kindness in a town square on a winter Saturday. A life assembled piece by piece from what was left after everything else was taken. And it was not what she had planned, and not what she had imagined, and not what she would have chosen if you'd asked her at 24 what she wanted. It was better. It was so much better. "Ethan," she said. Thank you for being late to leave that day." She meant the auction. He knew she meant the auction. He brought her hand up and held it for a moment and then said, "Thank you for opening the door on a Sunday." They sat on the porch together as the light went down over the Nebraska land, the same flat, wide, patient land that had taken everything from her once and given it back differently, and the dark came up soft and slow, and the stars came, and Anna Miller, Anna Carter. Anna, who had stood in an auction square with her chin up and her hands shaking, and refused to let a town full of people make her small, breathed in the night air of a life she had built herself piece by piece with her own hands and her own courage, and the steady presence of a man who had known from the first moment what she was worth. And that knowledge, not his love, not his steadiness, not the land or the security or the years, that knowledge was what had saved her. Because the greatest thing Ethan Carter ever gave Anna Miller was not $10, and not a cow, and not a proposal on a winter evening. It was the mirror he held up from the very first Sunday, every ordinary morning of 20 years, in which she could finally see what had always been true, that she had never needed saving. She had only needed someone brave enough to see her and patient enough to wait while she believed it herself. And in the end she did.